the street. They collect bricks from the sidewalk and throw them at the police. They make petrol bombs with glass bottles and throw them at the police and at government buildings. They break into and destroy the offices of government officials. And American flags can be seen in the streets.
How did this happen? Why are protesters demanding U.S. sanctions on their own city? Let's unmask Hong Kong's anti-government movement and find out. The first massive march happened in June of 2019, following a law change proposed by Chief Executive Carrie Lam, who said she didn't receive any instructions to do so from Beijing. Now, that same day, the United States warned that the proposed amendment could endanger its citizens in Hong Kong and threatened that it would retaliate by re-examining Hong Kong's preferential economic status as compared to the mainland.
We are also concerned that the amendments could damage Hong Kong's business environment and subject our citizens residing in or visiting Hong Kong to China's capricious judicial system. The continued erosion of the one country, two systems framework puts at risk Hong Kong's long-established special status in international affairs.
But let's take a closer look at this amendment to extradition law and its misconceptions.
A pregnant young woman named Poon Hugh Wing went to Taiwan with her boyfriend, a Hong Konger named Chang Tong Kai. When he learned she slept with another man, he strangles her to death, stuffs her in a suitcase, and dumps it in some bushes. He returns to Hong Kong, but because Hong Kong doesn't have an extradition agreement with Taiwan, he remains free. This is the case that the Hong Kong government cites when proposing the infamous extradition bill.
What the bill would do is allow Hong Kong to surrender fugitives like Chang Tong Kai on a case-by-case basis to any territory with which the region doesn't already have an extradition treaty. That includes Taiwan, and it includes mainland China. Opposition politicians immediately claimed that Beijing would use this bill to jail political dissidents. And the Western corporate press seemed to be under that impression as well, that the extradition bill was a sign of China's creeping authoritarianism.
Government tried to introduce legislation allowing defendants to be extradited to mainland China, where courts are controlled by the ruling Communist Party.
They control media, they control the economy, they control no criticism allowed against the Communist Chinese.
The Chinese government will use the new law to silence its political opponent.
I asked a high-ranking Hong Kong lawmaker and the former Secretary of Security if there was any truth to this claim, that with the bill, China would be able to jail political dissidents. The opposition claims that it would allow political dissidents to be jailed in mainland China. Is there any truth to that?
No truth whatsoever. You know, our amendment legislation only expands the geographical coverage of the existing legislation, which was enacted before 1997 and fully compliant with international human rights standards.
Now, the extradition bill was tabled and even then declared dead by Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam.
I have almost immediately put a stop to the amendment exercise. But there are still lingering doubts about the government's sincerity or worries whether the government will restart the process in the Legislative Council. So I reiterate here, there is no such plan. The bill is dead.
But the protests continued and escalated. Unsatisfied protesters created a list of 5 demands: the full official withdrawal of the extradition bill, for the government to stop designating the protesters as rioters, unconditional amnesty for everyone arrested and jailed so far, for the government to start an independent investigation into police brutality outside its existing complaints council, and for immediate universal suffrage. Soon, it became dangerous to even voice opposition to these protesters. Western politicians became very vocal about their support for these demonstrations.
The United States stands with the democratic protesters in Hong Kong.
The protesters in Hong Kong have sent a stirring message to the rest of the world about the dreams of freedom and justice.
In Hong Kong, these are protesters who are simply seeking liberty and freedom.
But maybe it's ironic that the West is now supporting a democracy movement in Hong Kong.
In the late 1700s, the British East India Company, the largest transnational corporation of its time, was selling opium in China illegally. Millions of Chinese people became addicted, including large numbers of children. By the 1830s, British and American entrepreneurs were getting rich selling opium to these Chinese addicts. And when the Chinese government ordered them to stop, the British invaded, sending gunboats to Chinese ports and blockading the Pearl River. The British destroyed Chinese warships and looted entire cities. And once China was defeated militarily, China was forced to sign this treaty in 1842. It's the first of what the Chinese call the unequal treaties. And it gave the British control over Hong Kong Island. After it took the island, it used this perfect port city to ship drugs more efficiently.
Hong Kong was built on stolen land from the Opium Wars that Britain, the U.S., France, Germany, the great powers of the time, but particularly Britain, imposed on China. And it was a demand under the name of free trade to sell opium in massive quantities throughout China. And when China resisted that, there was an invading army that literally looted the capital, the major cities, the ports of China.
During the entire British era, which lasts until 1997, there was a de facto kind of apartheid that existed in Hong Kong. Chinese people were treated like third-class citizens.
Somehow it's been lost in this that Hong Kong was stolen from China by the British Empire as part of a broader attempt to actually weaken China as a major world power, which is maybe the most anti-democratic thing you could think of, right? An empire just coming in and just stealing a part of a country.
In 1984, the Chinese and the British signed a joint declaration stating that China would resume its sovereignty over Hong Kong on July 1st, 1997, and that Hong Kong would exist under a policy called One Country, Two Systems.